My majestic immortal king, do you say I eat soft rice? Introduction. In the 3rd year of college, women hold golden bricks, while in the 30th year, women give away rivers and mountains. A female college student of 3,000 ranks among the immortal class. Zhang Daoheng traveled to the fantasy world and was taken in by an elder in the realm of transforming gods who was several hundred years older than him. He wanted to be her Taoist priest himself. At first, Zhang Daoheng refused, but the other party gave him too much. Xu Yueqing has become obsessed with cultivation, so please don't hesitate. Chapter 1. I am a shield. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Zhang Daoheng followed Elder Xu Yueqing to the Forgetful Peak. Before Zhang Daoheng could look around carefully, he heard Elder Xu Yueqing speak. I chose you as a Taoist couple today, but it happened to be their meeting. If you don't want to, you can leave now. Zhang Daoheng moved his head and turned his gaze to the elder in front of him, Xu Yueqing. Xu Yueqing continued to speak without paying attention to Zhang Daoheng's reaction, speaking on her own. The sect thinks that my cultivation is too indulgent and leads me astray, so they want me to find a Taoist priest to disperse the effects of forgetfulness. Just as you have just started, your appearance is good, your temperament is not bad, and you look quite pleasing to the eye, so I chose you as my Taoist couple. Xu Yueqing's face was cold and her eyes were indifferent. It seems that nothing can cause her psychological fluctuations. Xu Yueqing calmly looked at Zhang Daoheng and opened the door to see the mountain path. You can do anything on this mountain peak normally. When the elder asks, you can block it for me. Don't have any inappropriate thoughts about the rest. When Zhang Daoheng was selected, he had already had a vague expectation. He knew that a big pie couldn't fall on him. But upon hearing these words, I still couldn't help feeling lost and helpless. He said, how could it be that the strongest elder was interested in him right after he started? Still single for hundreds of years, the strongest elder of Daoxian sect. So it's because of this reason. Sure enough, pies won't fall from the sky. However, even so, my identity has undergone a tremendous change. If I hadn't been picked by the elder, then I would still be an ordinary miscellaneous disciple now. Don't mention settling in one of the peaks. Doing miscellaneous tasks every day doesn't necessarily mean having time for cultivation. It's a pity, there's no soft rice to eat. As the saying goes, women in their 3rd year should embrace golden bricks. A woman in her 30s, sending off rivers and mountains. 300 daughters, give the elixir to the immortal. A female college student of 3,000 ranks among the immortal class. Although the elder in front of me may not be 3,000 years older than me, it's okay to be a few hundred years older than me. Moreover, it has strong strength and a strong sense of security. It's a pity that I couldn't afford this soft meal and became a tool for the elders to shield me. The disciple knows. Zhang Daoheng bowed to the elder Xu Yueqing in front of him and said. Xu Yueqing nodded slightly. After a pause, he spoke again, since that's the case, you can choose any room on this mountain peak. After speaking, Xu Yueqing glanced at her surroundings and frowned. Because after the peak of forgetfulness belonged to her, she never took in any apprentices and remained deserted for a long time. No one was smoking, so naturally no one went to tidy up and repair those houses. After thinking for a moment, Xu Yueqing pondered for 2 seconds and said, these rooms are more or less damaged. You can choose any room you like to tidy up and move in temporarily. Tomorrow, please summon some miscellaneous disciples to help repair the damaged area. Zhang Daoheng bowed again and said, okay, Elder Yueqing. If you have any questions, go to the mountaintop to find me. After Xu Yueqing finished speaking, she left. Zhang Daoheng finished his salute and still lowered his head. After listening to Elder Xu Yueqing's words, as soon as he stood up, he saw Elder Xu Yueqing's body disintegrate and disappear into illusion. Standing still, Zhang Daoheng felt a little helpless in his heart. This elder is really a cultivator. After explaining, I couldn't wait to leave. Although helpless, Zhang Daoheng had no choice. Zhang Daoheng was thinking that he had not yet received the martial arts issued by the sect. In his spare time, he saw abandoned houses, many of which had collapsed. Shaking his head, he said, "Forget it, let's choose a room first." He began to choose his own house on the forgotten peak. Because there are too many rooms that have not been used or repaired for a long time, the rooms with intact appearances are either rotten wood or infested with ants and insects due to long-term disrepair. Selecting, Zhang Daoheng kept walking towards the mountaintop. Finally, select a few relatively intact rooms. After a glance, Zhang Daoheng guessed that it was probably a true disciple from the Forgotten Love Peak in the past, or some elders who stayed behind. Because the materials are precious, it looks grand, and there are also gardens and fish ponds in the house, paved with bluestone. Even wood is a rare item, and Zhang Daoheng tried it but couldn't leave any marks with it. Ordinary people do not have this treatment. Walking in and taking a look, Zhang Daoheng found that the room inside was also well preserved and had a low degree of decay. It's just that I haven't taken care of it for too long, resulting in a thick layer of dust accumulation. After spending a lot of time, Zhang Daoheng finally cleaned the room, but he was completely disheveled. Helpless, Zhang Daoheng had to boil water to wash his face. It wasn't until Zhang Daoheng changed into new clothes that he remembered that he had just started and the sect had not yet cultivated his martial arts. Stepping out the door, it was already afternoon. Zhang Daoheng walked towards the mountaintop hungry. Arriving at the mountaintop, Zhang Daoheng saw his cheap wife sitting on a blue stone and closed his eyes to meditate. Zhang Daoheng saw that the elder was still practicing, so he thought for a moment and decided to wait, so he stood by and watched. From this observation, Zhang Daoheng suddenly discovered the differences between Elder Xu Yueqing and the present. Zhang Daoheng felt that Xu Yueqing at this moment seemed to have become part of the peak of forgetting emotions. The whole person has a feeling that seems non-existent and ubiquitous. The more he looked, the more fascinated Zhang Daoheng became. Until the end, Zhang Daoheng suddenly entered a special feeling. He closed his eyes, as if he had transformed into something on the peak of forgetfulness. However, although Zhang Daoheng closed his eyes, he seemed to be able to see or feel everything on this mountain peak again. Even the dust suspended in the air, the stones underfoot, the surrounding houses, and even the insects and ants inside some abandoned houses can be felt. But correspondingly, Zhang Daoheng seemed to suddenly become an observer in this feeling. Zhaoshuyuan.com however, in this feeling, he cannot feel the existence of his cheap wife. For everything, it is a feeling of indifference yet tolerance. At this moment, it seems like I have become a god. It seems like he can run the sun and moon now, yet he is heartless and emotionless. Zhang Daoheng sank deeper and deeper into the mystery, as if he had seen the mysteries between heaven and earth. Time quietly passed by, and it wasn't until sunset that Zhang Daoheng suddenly remembered that he hadn't gone to the worker peak to collect anything yet. Suddenly, Zhang Daoheng began to break away from this mysterious state. Opening his eyes, Zhang Daoheng saw his cheap wife, Elder Yueqing, still practicing with his eyes closed. After some thought, Zhang Daoheng decided to come back tomorrow and not disturb Xu Yueqing's cultivation. After a moment, Xu Yueqing, sitting upright on a blue stone, slowly opened her eyes. Staring in the direction of Zhang Daoheng's departure, Xu Yueqing recalled her feelings just now, her indifferent eyes flashing with confusion. Strange. Xu Yueqing frowned and opened her mouth, feeling a little surprised in her heart. Did he just realize that he was too passionate? With a slight frown, Xu Yueqing murmured to herself, "I think I overthought it. This is so forgetful that even as a deity, I find it difficult to comprehend. How can he, as an ordinary person who has not yet practiced, comprehend it?" After a moment of contemplation, Xu Yueqing couldn't come up with the truth and could only speculate. "I think he was attracted to me when I was too passionate, and he unexpectedly resonated." After speaking, Xu Yueqing shook her head and didn't think much anymore. Continue to close your eyes and comprehend the Supreme Immortal Sutra, Tai Shang Forget Emotion. P.S. The system and realm of this book are practicing Qi, building foundations, elixirs of gold, primordial spirits, transforming spirits, returning to emptiness, Mahayana, and ascending to immortality. Chapter 2. Waste Materials. Genius. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, the next day. Zhang Daoheng ran up to the mountaintop early in the morning and found Elder Xu Yueqing, who had not yet started practicing. Yesterday, Zhang Yifeng only gave Zhang Daoheng some clothes and daily necessities, as well as 10 bottles of Pai Gu Dan, and it was gone. As for the cultivation method, because Zhang Daoheng's identity is extraordinary, Zhang Yifeng asked him to ask Elder Xu Yueqing. What's up? Seeing Zhang Daoheng looking for her again, Xu Yueqing's eyes flashed with confusion. Seeing Xu Yueqing's attitude, Zhang Daoheng was also helpless. Elder, you didn't pass on my martial arts skills yesterday. Xu Yueqing finally remembered that the Taoist priest she had found was a newcomer who had just started. After pondering for a moment, Xu Yueqing shook her hand and a token appeared. This is my peak master's order. Take it and choose a martial arts technique. Xu Yueqing was just pondering whether to teach the other person a martial art by herself. But after thinking about it, everyone has their own destiny, so I decided not to interfere. So he simply took out the peak master's order and let the other party choose it themselves. Thank you, Elder, Zhang Daoheng said to Xu Yueqing as he took over the order from the peak leader. Xu Yueqing responded, but there was no other reaction. Seeing that Xu Yueqing had no further instructions, Zhang Daoheng wisely took his leave and said, that disciple has left first. Go ahead. After Xu Yueqing finished speaking, she walked over to the blue stone from yesterday and began to meditate with her eyes closed. Seeing Xu Yueqing start practicing again, Zhang Daoheng turned around and left directly. Leaving the mountaintop, Zhang Daoheng couldn't help but recall the process of getting along and talking with this elder, feeling that their relationship was really strange. On the surface, it may seem like a Taoist relationship, but when it comes to getting along, Zhang Daoheng feels a lot of pressure. And when we get along, it's more like a master-disciple relationship than a Taoist couple relationship. Or the kind that the master doesn't pay attention to. At most, I can only be considered a pure tool person, an excuse used by the other party to block other elders. However, despite thinking so, Zhang Daoheng is still very grateful to the other party. After all, without this identity, Zhang Daoheng would still be a miscellaneous disciple now. Zhang Daoheng arrived at the Sutra Pavilion of the Forgotten Love Peak and used a token to sweep through the Prohibition formation, allowing Zhang Daoheng to pass through. As for why there is also a Scripture Pavilion on the Forgotten Love Peak, Zhang Daoheng doesn't know either. But he guessed that the secret books and other items in the Sutra Pavilion should have been put in by Elder Xu Yueqing. The Sutra Pavilion of the Forgetting Emotion Peak is naturally incomparable to the general Sutra Pavilion of the Taoist Xuanzong. As soon as Zhang Daoheng walked in, he saw that the entire Sutra Pavilion only had one floor. And inside this floor, not even a bookshelf is full. There are a total of 12 bookshelves here, but only one bookshelf has secret techniques. I took a closer look. Zhang Daoheng roughly counted, but it was only about 200 copies. After randomly selecting a few books and reading them, Zhang Daoheng found that these secret scripts were easy to understand. Zhang Daoheng frowned and couldn't help but think, is it possible that these are all ordinary goods? Zhang Daoheng is a bit hesitant about his own qualifications. Inferior spiritual roots are the most useless talent besides inferior ones. And I am stuck in the line between the lowest and lowest quality. If he didn't even reach the lower level, Zhang Daoheng wouldn't even be able to become a miscellaneous disciple. The talents of this world are divided into 6 classes. The first priority is to have a special physique and practice special techniques. The second level is the heavenly spirit root, which is a talent that surpasses the superior spiritual root. The third is top quality, the fourth is medium quality, the fifth is inferior, and finally it is inferior, making it difficult to cultivate even at the beginner level. And among all living beings, most of them are inferior. Even his own useless talent can be learned by just looking at it once, and Zhang Daoheng naturally believes that those secret scripts are all ordinary. So Zhang Daoheng began to choose. It wasn't until Zhang Daoheng flipped through dozens of martial arts books that he noticed that a secret script was somewhat extraordinary. Because Zhang Daoheng looked at it once and only realized a little bit. This skill should have a mysterious level, right? Holding a golden paper recording the technique in his hand, he spoke in an uncertain tone. After understanding, Zhang Daoheng found that the martial arts in this world are divided into 7 levels. The front ones are the dark yellow of heaven and earth. Above this, there are 3 levels. Immortal Dharma, heavenly scriptures, and Taoist scriptures. Immortal Dharma refers directly to the cultivation of the path to immortality, while the heavenly book is a record of the sentient perception of heaven and earth by the supreme power, or a natural formation of heaven and earth, containing a portion of the highest principles of the heavenly way. As for the Taoist scriptures, they are the Taoist teachings recorded by the supreme powers, all of which contain an understanding of the Tao. Zhang Daoheng finally flipped through a book, and after reading it once, he could only comprehend the technique of Fur, and then guessed that it was a mysterious level technique. Zhang Daoheng first took out this book separately, then continued to look through it to see if he could find the techniques of the earth steps. After reading the results, the rest can only be understood by reading it 2 or 3 times at most. Only after reading this technique twice did Zhang Daoheng have a preliminary idea. Can this skill be considered top-notch even in the Xuanjia level? Zhang Daoheng frowned and guessed, or is this cultivation actually a ground level? After some thought, I couldn't come up with a clue. Zhang Daoheng simply stopped thinking and said, forget it, just this one. After selecting the cultivation method, Zhang Daoheng left the Sutra Pavilion. Zhaozhuyuan.com. Returning to his own room, Zhang Daoheng began to carefully ponder. Every time I watch, Zhang Daoheng gains something. Upon seeing it for the 18th time, Zhang Daoheng finally gained a complete understanding of this technique called Great Harmony between Heaven and Earth. Heavenly attack, easy to move stars; earthly attack, dragons and snakes landing; human attack, earth-shattering. And this cultivation method emphasizes the unity of heaven and earth, and the unity of heaven, earth, and man. In this way, you can temporarily gain some power from heaven and earth. Compared to fellow cultivators in the same realm, it is more than 10 times stronger. Zhang Daoheng was amazed and said, this secret script is truly a ground-level skill. It is indeed powerful. It's not in vain that I've read it 18 times before getting started. Zhang Daoheng, who was overjoyed, couldn't contain his excitement and started sitting cross-legged, practicing the Great Harmony of Heaven and Earth technique. At the beginning of his cultivation, Zhang Daoheng felt some difficulty. Subsequently, I couldn't help but recall the scene of watching my master cultivate, and once again entered a state that seemed to merge with heaven and earth. After falling into this state, Zhang Daoheng found that when he was running this skill, it was surprisingly unobstructed. Even Zhang Daoheng, who fell into a state of heartlessness and indifference, felt very smooth. Zhang Daoheng pondered and wondered if these 2 martial arts were complementary. As soon as Zhang Daoheng began to ponder this question, he felt that the spiritual energy around him was starting to run out. With a second thought, Zhang Daoheng utilized his ability to integrate heaven, earth, and humans in his cultivation technique to gather all the spiritual energy he felt around him for his own cultivation. If viewed from above, one can see that the intangible spiritual energy seems to gather into a vortex. The center of the vortex is where Zhang Daoheng is located. Chapter 3. Unfortunately, my physical condition is too poor. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, peak. Xu Yueqing was contemplating Tai Shang forget emotion when she suddenly noticed a change in the fluctuation of spiritual energy. She suddenly disappeared and appeared in the area of spiritual energy fluctuations, describing a spiritual energy vortex within a range of several hundred meters. Who is practicing? Seeing this movement, Xu Yueqing immediately realized that someone was practicing. But after a brief moment of contemplation, she realized that there was no one on her own mountain peak. The only person is the cheap Taoist couple I found yesterday. Their talent is extremely poor, and it's impossible to have such a stir. Wrinkling her brows, Xu Yueqing did not break in directly, but prepared to wait until the other party's cultivation was completed to see the specific situation. Half an hour has passed since we waited. Zhang Daoheng practiced for a week and successfully stepped into a layer of qi cultivation. At this point, Zhang Daoheng finished his cultivation and was ready to go out for a walk. He also took a trip to the Zai Peak to have his disciples repair the damaged houses. However, as soon as Zhang Daoheng walked out of the room, he saw Elder Xu Yueqing waiting outside the door. Zhang Daoheng was taken aback for a moment and quickly bowed. "I don't know what the elder is up to." Xu Yueqing looked at Zhang Daoheng and fell into a brief silence. "Just now. Were you practicing?" Although Xu Yueqing was puzzled, she already had an answer in her heart. Zhang Daoheng admitted, "It's my disciple." Another brief silence. Xu Yueqing had some doubts in her eyes and asked Zhang Daoheng, "What kind of martial arts are you practicing?" Zhang Daoheng didn't know why the other party was asking this, but he remained honest and said, "My disciple is practicing the great harmony of heaven and earth, from the Sutra Pavilion." After speaking, Zhang Daoheng also had some doubts and couldn't help but ask, "Elder, is this martial art a ground-level martial art?" The disciple watched it 18 times before finally gaining a preliminary understanding. Later, during his cultivation, he went even smoother, and according to the above statement, he was more than 10 times stronger than his peers in the same realm. This should be a ground-level technique, right? Zhang Daoheng said with some uncertainty. Xu Yueqing was at a loss for a moment, feeling a bit confused in her heart. Earth step technique. How can the earth-level technique be so powerful? This is clearly a heavenly book that I accidentally obtained. And it can still be compared to the heavenly book of Taoism. After watching it hundreds of times, I finally understood a little bit, but this disciple only saw it 18 times before finally gaining a preliminary understanding. And you also practiced smoothly. In an instant, Elder Xu Yueqing fell into silence, unsure of how to answer. Zhang Daoheng felt a bit disappointed as he watched Elder Xu Yueqing fall into silence. It seems that this skill is not a ground level. Zhang Daoheng's tone was somewhat regretful. Upon hearing these words, Xu Yueqing couldn't help but twitch her lips. She didn't know what it felt like in her heart now, but she still said, "This cultivation goes beyond the earthly level. Not just on the ground level." Zhang Daoheng was taken aback for a moment, then his eyes lit up and he said, "Isn't it the heavenly staircase?" Xu Yueqing didn't feel like speaking for a moment. This person's vision is really too low, even if they say it themselves, the other person doesn't know the specifics. So Xu Yueqing said indifferently, "Just take it for granted." After speaking, Xu Yueqing paused and remembered the commotion just now. "Come here, I'll help you explore your meridians." Zhang Daoheng followed his words. Xu Yueqing placed her fingers on Zhang Daoheng's shoulder, and her true qi swam around her body before returning. But Zhang Daoheng widened his eyes and looked at Xu Yueqing, waiting for the other party's next instructions. Looking at the disciple who still didn't know what was going on, Xu Yueqing sighed in her heart. Unfortunately, this spiritual route is too poor. The movement just now, if it were a disciple of top-grade spiritual roots, they could all step into the third level of qi cultivation at once. The result is that this disciple is doing well. Currently, the progress of practicing the first layer of qi is hovering around 20%. Poor foundation, poor spiritual foundation, poor physique, and poor meridians. The retention rate is only about 10%. It's a pity for this amazing insight. Zhang Daoheng is quite curious about the reason why his cheap wife explores her meridians. But seeing the other person remain silent, Zhang Daoheng wisely did not ask further questions. After waiting for a while, Xu Yueqing finally remembered something. Why did you choose the technique of heaven and earth unity? Xu Yueqing's beautiful eyes revealed doubts. Some people are destined by fate and are born with a certain skill, and their cultivation will be much smoother. She suspected that Zhang Daoheng had some special feelings about this technique, which is why he chose it. If that's the case, it means that Zhang Daoheng should have been the person of the number of days in this heavenly book. Zhang Daoheng didn't think too much. He honestly said, when I entered the Sutra Pavilion, I found only about 200 secret books. Then I casually read it, and after reading it all, I understood the other techniques. I felt like they were all ordinary people, so I continued to read until I read this book once and only gained a superficial understanding. The disciple guessed at the time that this skill was of the Xuanjie level. Then the disciple continued to look at other techniques, and at most 2 or 3 times he could understand them. The disciple then began to guess that this technique was at ground level. The disciple thought to himself that in order to cultivate, he naturally had to choose the strongest technique, so he could only select this local level technique from the Sutra Pavilion. At this point, Zhang Daoheng hesitated to speak and didn't know what to say. Hesitating for a moment, Zhang Daoheng spoke up and said, but according to what the elder just said, this skill should be of the heavenly rank, and the disciple picked up a loophole. Xu Yueqing was speechless for a moment. Xuanjie. Earthji, you're insulting this heavenly book, kid. The Sutra Pavilion was all the spoils of Xu Yueqing's own war. He found the book garden www.zhaoshuyuan.com to print some copies and sent them to the general pavilion, which were originally placed in his own Sutra Pavilion. Among them, the worst ones are all heavenly level cultivation techniques. There are also a few immortal scriptures and incomplete ones. This heavenly book was unexpectedly encountered by her, and she then used the great momentum of heaven and earth to engrave it on this lock immortal path paper. This heavenly book is a book that can rival the Taoist scriptures. But the other party mistakenly thought it was the earth level. Oh, now it's the heavenly level. Xu Yueqing doesn't even know what she feels like now. However, the other party's intelligence is astonishing enough. You can understand the heavenly level technique by reading it once, and learn the immortal classic by reading it 2 or 3 times. Even the heavenly book, which is comparable to the Taoist scriptures, cannot defeat him. Thinking of this, Xu Yueqing suddenly remembered something again. Last time, she thought that Zhang Daoheng had entered a state of forgetfulness, but it was just because of an unexpected resonance. Now it seems that it's really possible that I learned it through my own practice. This insight is amazing, but it's a pity for this talent. If you continue to maintain this cultivation speed, it is almost equivalent to a talent that is close to the top-level spiritual root in the middle level. I'm a bit behind my peers thinking of this. Xu Yueqing shook her head. Xu Yueqing stopped thinking too much and prepared to leave. As a result, when I saw Zhang Daoheng, I suddenly remembered that the other party had not yet learned any attack techniques. So Xu Yueqing spoke to Zhang Daoheng, your intelligence is quite amazing, but your talent is a bit lacking. I want to teach you a way to protect yourself. Zhang Daoheng's eyes lit up. I have 2 methods for attacking the heavenly way, 3 methods for attacking the underground way, 3 methods for attacking the humanity way, and 1 method for attacking the small way. Which subject do you want to learn? Chapter 4. Divine Powers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. The means of attack in this world can be understood as martial arts and supernatural powers. The corresponding level of the path is Jiandi Xianhuang 4th level. Above the heavenly staircase, there are 4 levels. Humanity, earthly Tao, heavenly Tao, and great Tao. The path is used by people, so it is weaker than humanity. Life is born in heaven and earth, and used in heaven and earth, so it is weaker than the two paths of heaven and earth. As for the avenue, it is something that true immortals consider. Zhang Daoheng didn't know the specific strength, so Xu Yueqing helped Zhang Daoheng clarify. After Zhang Daoheng understood, he immediately said, I want to learn the heavenly way to attack and conquer. Learn to learn the strongest. If you become weak in learning, you will be beaten and become someone else's background. However, to Zhang Daoheng's surprise, Elder Xu Yueqing shook his head and said, Can you learn? Zhang Daoheng's expression froze for a moment, and then Xu Yueqing began to explain. Heavenly Tao attack requires realm support. At the very least, you need the realm of the primordial spirit to use it. Zhang Daoheng's face collapsed. Later, Zhang Daoheng regained his composure and asked, Can the disciples use tunnels and humanity to attack the Dharma gate? Xu Yueqing fell silent for a moment, then sorted out her words and immediately spoke, Yes, but with some limitations. There are 3 divine powers in the tunnel. 1 is to move mountains, 2 is to control the wind, and 3 is to cover the sun. Moving mountains to the depths of the essence, one can move mountains and fill the sea. Even if it's just in beginner, one can obtain supreme power blessings, far exceeding the same level by 100 times. Riding the wind is the body technique. Walking against the wind, one can easily reach a distance of 100 zhang in the blink of an eye. Whether chasing or escaping, it is extremely convenient. As for covering the sun, it is the method of restraining breath, covering one's own breath, covering the breath of others, and covering the breath of all things. Xu Yueqing slowly walked over. Zhang Daoheng's eyes showed shock. But after Xu Yueqing's words, Zhang Daoheng couldn't hold his breath. To cultivate to the depths of the essence, at the very least, one must have a spiritual cultivation level. To get started, one must also build a foundation and cultivate one's skills. Or build a foundation through the heavenly way, gaining a ray of the aura of the heavenly way. Xu Yueqing spoke the truth. Speaking of which, Zhang Daoheng understood. Zhang Daoheng smiled bitterly and said, So it seems that the disciples can only choose the path. Xu Yueqing nodded slightly. If your cultivation is insufficient, even if you teach you the other powerful divine powers, you won't be able to use them. So, then I will teach you a swordsmanship that you can use. Upon hearing these words, Zhang Daoheng immediately bowed and said, Please grant me the Dharma, Elder. Xu Yueqing spoke calmly, I have a swordsmanship that I used to practice before. Later on, as my realm improved, I couldn't keep up with my footsteps. So I optimized this swordsmanship a lot, and now I'm passing it on to you. This sword technique is called Golden Fire Rui Sword Technique. I majored in the golden fire in the 5 elements, which is powerful and terrifying. When you have enough cultivation, you can directly use the golden fire divine power without the need to borrow a sword to use it. This sword technique is the best at attacking and attacking, even the Xuanwu Faxiang is difficult to resist. Xuanwu Faxiang is a divine power of heaven and earth, said to be an authentic divine power, but its defense is not weaker than that of the heavenly divine power. I just don't pay much attention to attacking. Xu Yueqing rarely said more. Zhang Daoheng knew nothing about these, but he still expressed gratitude. Subsequently, Xu Yueqing began to teach the Golden Fire Rui Sword technique. After Xu Yueqing finished speaking, she asked Zhang Daoheng, Can you take note? Zhang Daoheng bowed and said, I have taken it down. Xu Yueqing let out a and then said, Since you have written it down, you should practice more in the future. After speaking, without waiting for Zhang Daoheng's reaction, Xu Yueqing's figure suddenly disintegrated and disappeared. Zhang Daoheng originally wanted to say some thank you words, but he saw this scene. I feel a bit helpless in my heart. Zhang Daoheng could only sigh with emotion as Elder Yueqing appeared and disappeared, and then he no longer hesitated. Then, Zhang Daoheng began to look for disciples of the Zai Peak to help repair the damaged house of the Forgotten Love Peak. In the following days, from time to time, there were miscellaneous disciples carrying materials and climbing the Forgotten Love Peak. I repaired those damaged houses. At the same time, some anti-corrosion measures were also taken to avoid being bitten by ants and insects again. Zhang Daoheng usually practices the great harmony of heaven and earth on the mountain peaks, and also practices swordsmanship when he has free time. After 3 days of fishing and 2 days of drying the net, Zhang Daoheng had practiced swordsmanship several times and still reached the level of perfection. Seeing that this swordsmanship is so easy to practice, Zhang Daoheng guessed that it should be a swordsmanship of the Menxian level. So Zhang Daoheng stopped practicing swordsmanship and began to carefully study the technique of the great harmony of heaven and earth. After completing his cultivation, Zhang Daoheng walked into the courtyard and faced a piece of iron stone in front of him. Iron and stone are hard, and Zhang Daoheng doesn't know what material it is, so he stands next to the rockery by the pond. He knocked with a hammer before and couldn't even knock off a corner. You should know that ordinary iron can be deformed by knocking, but this stone has no reaction. This only indicates that this stone is harder than ordinary iron. Looking at this iron stone, Zhang Daoheng had a sudden idea. If you don't use a sword, can you use your fingers to use the golden fire Rui sword technique? Do whatever comes to mind. Zhang Daoheng directly stood with 2 fingers, one finger running the fire of the 5 elements and the other finger running the gold of the 5 elements. In the fusion of gold and fire, it turns into endless heat. Zhang Daoheng whispered to the iron stone in front of him, Jin Hua Rui. Immediately, the finger pierced out. Brush. A sound like the howling breeze pierced through the iron stone in front of Zhang Daoheng, leaving a small hole pierced by the heat flow. Zhang Daoheng looked at the small hole with some shock, shocked by the power of his golden flame. Is this even stronger than the power of bullets? Zhang Daoheng couldn't help but think. Zhaoshuyuan.com. After a while, Zhang Daoheng finally regained his senses. Should it be said that it is truly a Xuanjia martial arts skill? Its power is so terrifying. Indeed, it is truly worthy of being a high martial arts immortal world. Zhang Daoheng sighed and continued his cultivation. Another day has passed. The sky is getting late. At this moment, Zhang Daoheng, who had completed his cultivation, felt that his stomach was a bit hungry. Rubbing his stomach, Zhang Daoheng took out the Pigu pill with some hesitation in his eyes. He has been taking Pigu Dan every day these days and is almost vomiting. Although Pigu Dan is not without its flavor, even if it has different flavors, it is not as satisfying as big fish and big meat. So Zhang Daoheng was a bit conflicted. Forget it, eating this every day is really boring. After some thought, Zhang Daoheng decided to do it himself. As for the tools, just borrow some pots, bowls, ladles, and pots from the disciples of Zai Peak. After Zhang Daoheng borrowed some ingredients, he had a sudden idea and also had a barbecue. So Zhang Daoheng started working directly. Peak. Xu Yueqing is closing her eyes and comprehending the selflessness of the Supreme Being. Just as I was about to close my eyes and meditate, I took a break when suddenly a fragrance wafted from outside. Although it is not a natural aroma similar to that of unparalleled ingredients, there is a distinct smoky smell. Xu Yueqing suddenly opened her eyes and looked towards the place where the fragrance drifted in. She knew that that was the direction of her cheap couple. With a slight frown, Xu Yueqing couldn't help but say, "What's this guy doing again?" After some thought, Xu Yueqing suddenly remembered that she had not seen that cheap Taoist couple for 5 days. So I decided to set off and take a look at the other person, by the way, to see what he was up to. Chapter 5. Preparation for Alchemy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. After Zhang Daoheng finished grilling, he placed it on the table. Suddenly, I saw Elder Yueqing coming uninvited. After a moment of confusion, Zhang Daoheng quickly stood up and said, I have seen Elder Yueqing. Are you making barbecue? Xu Yueqing entered the courtyard and couldn't help but frown at Zhang Daoheng's movements. Yes. Zhang Daoheng admitted with a hint of embarrassment on his face, Elder, why don't you have some food? Xu Yueqing was about to say something when she was interrupted by these words. She recalled the last time she ate mortal food, as if it was 200 years ago. After a moment of silence, Xu Yu said lightly, then let's have some. It's Zhang Daoheng's turn to be stunned this time. He was just being polite just now, however. Having said it all, Zhang Daoheng couldn't regret it and could only let Elder Xu Yueqing sit down. After Zhang Daoheng finished grilling the ingredients, the two of them began to taste them. At the entrance, Xu Yueqing's calm expression froze. This barbecue. Xu Yueqing didn't know what to say for a moment. If she had to describe it, it would probably be delicious. Zhang Daoheng heard Xu Yueqing speak and turned his head to look at Xu Yueqing. He was eating a roasted pig's trotters in his mouth and muttered, Elder, is it delicious? It's pretty good. Xu Yueqing nodded slightly, the taste was indeed good. If it weren't for the slightly inferior ingredients and poor seasoning, the taste would probably be much better than those spiritual foods. Zhang Daoheng chuckled and said, this is nature. This is the secret seasoning from my disciples' hometown. Mix different seasonings and sprinkle some grilled meat, and the taste will be very good. Xu Yueqing suddenly realized. Subsequently, the two of them had enough to eat and drink, and Xu Yueqing left directly again. Just like when he came, he remained calm and appeared as if he had gone. Zhang Daoheng had long been accustomed to Xu Yueqing's supernatural presence, so he began to tidy up the utensils and so on. It's already evening now, and Zhang Daoheng felt the concentration of spiritual energy around him. The spiritual energy has been restored to 7 or 8 times. After thinking for a moment, Zhang Daoheng started practicing again. After a round of Zhou Tian cultivation, Zhang Daoheng felt his own realm and felt a bit helpless in his heart. My physical condition is really poor. Even if the spiritual energy around me is only a few hundred meters, it can only supply me for cultivation, and I cannot retain much. It has been 5 days now, and he is still practicing a layer of qi and spinning. If I were a top grade. No, even the worst mid-level talent would probably have already practiced 3 or 4 levels of qi by now. Unfortunately, the speed of spiritual energy recovery is a bit slow, and only the peak of the mountain has the highest concentration of spiritual energy. Zhang Daoheng sighed and felt a bit worried about his talent. By the way, Zhang Daoheng was sighing when suddenly a spiritual light flashed and he remembered something. I remember that the sect seems to have alchemy to learn. Why don't you try going through the drug-taking process? The more he thought about it, the more Zhang Daoheng was tempted. I glanced at the sky and estimated that it was only 8 or 9 o'clock now. Simply stand up and prepare to go to the Sutra Pavilion to try out this alchemy technique. Of course, it's not the Sutra Pavilion left by Xu Yueqing, it's the General Sutra Pavilion of Daoxian sect. After receiving the post-alchemy manual, Zhang Daoheng returned to the Forgetful Peak. The sect does not hide or conceal these things. As long as you can demonstrate your talent in this area, the sect will maintain a supportive attitude. So Zhang Daoheng easily obtained this basic manual. Opening the manual, Zhang Daoheng glanced at it, which covered some precautions and tutorials. After looking around, Zhang Daoheng understood. Afterwards, he simply picked up the iron pot borrowed from his miscellaneous disciples and tried to practice alchemy. Half an hour later, Zhang Daoheng looked at the dark pills in front of him with some hesitation. Is this really the Pai Gu Dan? Zhang Daoheng hesitated in his tone and dared not confirm for a moment. Pai Gu Dan is a non-mainstream pill specifically designed for cultivators below the foundation level who are unable to create their own valleys. Forget it, give it a try. Biting his teeth, Zhang Daoheng opened his mouth directly and swallowed the Pai Gu Dan in one bite. Subsequently, Zhang Daoheng felt a sense of fullness coming from his stomach. Zhang Daoheng's face was surprised and he said, "Is it really the Pai Gu Dan? Did you really practice it? Is alchemy so simple?" Zhang Daoheng was a bit confused and said, "Or do you think I am a talent for alchemy?" Zhang Daoheng also has a preliminary understanding of his talent. "I may have a poor talent for cultivation, but I still have a strong understanding. I have read the heavenly level technique Heaven and Earth Unity 18 times and have fully understood it. Even Elder Yueqing said that his intelligence is amazing. So, should one's true talent be in alchemy, not in cultivation?" Thinking this way, Zhang Daoheng continued to try again. He chose a somewhat difficult qi-absorbing pill this time, which can provide spiritual energy equivalent to that of an ordinary qi practitioner practicing for a day. Another half hour has passed. As expected, Zhang Daoheng trained again this time. And because of the previous experience, this time the Na Qi Dan looks much better, round and glossy, no longer black in appearance. Zhang Daoheng's eyes flashed with excitement as he eagerly swallowed the pill. In the next moment, a majestic spiritual energy erupted within the body. Zhang Daoheng quickly practiced his martial arts and constantly transformed his spiritual energy. After a moment, Zhang Daoheng slowly exhaled a breath. This pill is equivalent to 1/10 of the effect of Zhang Daoheng's own cultivation when taken and found at Xu Yuan www.zhaoxuyuan.com. This is still because my talent is too poor to fully absorb spiritual energy. Sure enough, my thinking is right. Zhang Daoheng's eyes lit up and he said, "I want to take medication and practice immortality. But now it's getting late, I'll go to the sect tomorrow to get a set of alchemy furnaces and some medicinal herbs. Anyway, if you need to spend money, just deduct it directly from Xu Yueqing's token. I am the husband of Elder Yueqing. Can you use the opponent's token and achievement points? Is that okay?" The next day, Zhang Daoheng held the token and exchanged everything that needed to be exchanged, watching a group of laborers transport their belongings to the mountain peak. The alchemy furnace weighs 800 pounds, while the medicinal herbs are packaged in large and small packages for a whole carriage. But it's not that Zhang Daoheng doesn't want storage rings or bags, but rather that his current cultivation has not yet met the conditions for use. If you want to use a storage ring, you must have a minimum cultivation level of the primordial spirit period. It is said that the storage space involves the space of heaven and earth, and without controlling the power of heaven and earth, it cannot be used. This has caused great inconvenience to Zhang Daoheng. So Zhang Daoheng could only call a group of people to transport these things up the mountain in a grand manner. On the other side, Xu Yueqing took a rare night off without meditating, realizing that he had forgotten his emotions. After waking up, she couldn't help but recall the food she had eaten last night. Shaking her head and dispelling the image in her mind, Xu Yueqing thought to herself, "I haven't eaten for too long, and occasionally taste it, but I feel a bit greedy. Forget it, go see if he has made any food." Chapter 6. Hard, Fists Hard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Xu Yueqing walked out of her room and immediately noticed the movement on Zhang Daoheng's side. Feeling it, there were about 10 people, seemingly carrying something. Did he go find his miscellaneous disciples again? With a frown, Xu Yueqing was puzzled and said, "What is he looking for a miscellaneous disciple to do?" "I don't know what the situation is," so Xu Yueqing decided to go directly and take a look. Upon arriving at the room where Zhang Daoheng was located, Xu Yueqing immediately saw Zhang Daoheng commanding his miscellaneous disciples to place an alchemy furnace in the courtyard. Seeing this scene, Xu Yueqing's eyebrows furrowed deeply. "What are you doing?" Xu Yueqing frowned and spoke coldly. At the same time, the whole person emitted a cold breath. The feeling of not getting close to strangers struck, causing several miscellaneous disciples around to shiver involuntarily. Even Zhang Daoheng felt that the weather suddenly became a bit colder. Zhang Daoheng glanced at Xu Yueqing and then at the other miscellaneous disciples. He first said to the other miscellaneous disciples, "You guys go out first." If the miscellaneous disciples were granted amnesty, they quickly left this courtyard. Xu Yueqing just watched quietly without any obstruction. After all the miscellaneous disciples left, Xu Yueqing spoke up. Her voice was cold and she said, "So now you can talk about what you're doing." Zhang Daoheng could see that Xu Yueqing seemed a bit angry, but he didn't know why he was so angry. He said truthfully, "My disciples' cultivation speed is too slow, so I want to learn alchemy skills. This way, I can also be self-sufficient, sell money, and use it for myself." Zhang Daoheng had a good idea. He thought Xu Yueqing would support him, but no matter how bad it was, he just didn't stop or support him. But he didn't expect that Xu Yueqing would scold him directly. Nonsense. Xu Yueqing is really a bit annoyed. You are inherently lacking in talent, not practicing well, and constantly distracting yourself from thinking about what you have or not. You are wasting your intelligence. Upon hearing these words, Zhang Daoheng was completely bewildered. But Xu Yueqing continued to speak, her voice getting colder and colder. "The Feng Lord's order I gave you contains tens of millions of merit points, enough for you to use the period of transforming your spirit. You can definitely buy pills yourself, why bother refining pills yourself? Do you still have time to practice divine sword like this? And do you have that talent? That's how you used my peak master's order." Zhang Daoheng was so cursed that he dared not speak. After seeing that Xu Yueqing's anger was still hard to calm, but he stopped speaking, Zhang Daoheng finally probed the weak voice. "I have tried alchemy before and achieved it all in one attempt, which is why I want to alchemy on my own." The more Zhang Daoheng spoke, the quieter his voice became. Because he saw Xu Yueqing's face becoming increasingly ugly. Xu Yueqing was simply laughed at in anger. She felt that Zhang Daoheng was somewhat unreasonable. After calming down her anger for a moment, Xu Yueqing took a deep breath and spoke indifferently, "Is the pill you refined the Pigu pill?" "Yes." Although Zhang Daoheng had the intention to say that he had also refined a qi-absorbing pill, he didn't dare to speak up as he looked at Xu Yueqing with a cold face. Xu Yueqing couldn't help but sneer when she heard Zhang Daoheng admit. "Have you mastered the Pai Gu Dan? Is that right?" This is specially added by the sect to encourage new members. Those with alchemy talent can achieve it once, while those with poor talent can achieve it after practicing 2 or 3 times. When she was building the foundation, she was in high spirits and tried it. The Pai Gu Dan was successful with just 1 attempt, but the Na Chi Dan took 7 attempts to succeed once. As for the later results. At that time, the alchemist of the sect said that although she could become an alchemist, she could only practice 3 grade pills at most, corresponding to the level of the golden elixir. It's of no use to her at all. After giving up alchemy, she has now directly become a god-transforming cultivator in the 5th realm. In Xu Yueqing's view, Zhang Daoheng wasted his intelligence so much that he went to the book garden www.zhaozhuyuan.com to distract his energy from refining pills, which was a lack of focus. Xu Yueqing spoke coldly, "You don't need to refine pills anymore. You can just take my token and exchange it for pills." Xu Yueqing thought Zhang Daoheng would listen, but she didn't expect Zhang Daoheng to shake his head. The disciples have already replaced the alchemy furnace and medicinal herbs. It would be a pity to just give up like this. Upon hearing this, Xu Yueqing clenched her fists in an instant. At that moment, she wanted to hit Zhang Daoheng. "It's just." After a while, Xu Yueqing said, "Since you have made up your mind, then let it be with you. After you finish refining these herbs, you still haven't succeeded. It's not too late to turn back when you hit the southern wall." Xu Yueqing finished speaking indifferently and then left. She really doesn't want to talk nonsense anymore. Seeing this despicable scene, I suddenly lost my desire to satisfy my tongue. Zhang Daoheng watched Xu Yueqing leave, stunned and contemplating the previous conversation. At this moment, Zhang Daoheng suddenly realized that Pigu Dan is an easily refined pill. But when it comes to refining chi pills on your own, it's also very easy, isn't it? Is it because the elder mistakenly thought he had no talent? Looking at the position where Xu Yueqing had stood before, Zhang Daoheng smiled helplessly. Come on, even if I want to explain now, there's nothing I can do. The elder is either practicing or unable to see people. I am completely in a state of free range for myself. Shaking his head, Zhang Daoheng no longer hesitated about this, but began to unload the medicinal herbs and prepare for alchemy. With this cart of medicinal herbs, I can use them for myself in a short period of time. Chapter 7. Expected 6th grade. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, time flies by rapidly. On the day when Zhang Daoheng became the couple of Xu Yueqing, a month passed in the blink of an eye. The leader of Daoxian's sect, Zhang Tianling, finished his cultivation and suddenly remembered about Elder Yueqing. After a little calculation, Zhang Tianling realized that a month had already passed when Xu Yueqing was asked to find a Taoist couple. The purpose of Xu Yueqing's appointment of a miscellaneous disciple as a Taoist priest is well known by Zhang Tianling and the elders. It's just about wanting to casually find someone to fool oneself and others. But Zhang Tianling didn't want to force too hard, so he agreed to the other party's choice. Now that a month has passed, Zhang Tianling is a bit curious about how the two get along. If Xu Yueqing still maintains that state of being too passionate, Zhang Tianling is ready to put pressure on him. However, Zhang Tianling did not directly call Xu Yueqing over, but prepared to first learn about the miscellaneous disciple. After Zhang Tianling gave orders, someone quickly compiled information about what had happened on the Forgotten Love Peak for the past month and presented it to Zhang Tianling. This little guy's talent is not good, he is the lowest grade spiritual root. But is alchemy talent good? Seeing this, Zhang Tianling's expression was slightly surprised. The front are all the ordinary lives of that miscellaneous disciple. The specific details of what happened on the peak of forgetting emotions are unclear, so the records are also vague. Zhang Tianling didn't think there was anything special about being a miscellaneous disciple, so he didn't pay attention. But seeing the alchemist in the sect personally say that Zhang Daoheng's alchemy talent is good enough to surprise Zhang Tianling. Because what the alchemist said was good, he meant that Zhang Daoheng would definitely become a third-grade alchemist in the future. As for the higher level, it depends on whether the opponent can break through the realm of the primordial spirit and even transform the spirit. It also records the remarks of the miscellaneous disciples on it. According to the miscellaneous disciples, when Zhang Daoheng wanted to refine pills, Elder Yueqing seemed unhappy. After learning about Zhang Daoheng's intelligence, Zhang Tianling's eyes lit up slightly. Why does he want to force Elder Yueqing to find a Taoist couple? It's not because Elder Yueqing's cultivation is too forgetful that he's almost possessed, or in other words, he has entered the realm. Once a monk enters the Tao, he is one with heaven and earth, and one with the Tao. At that time, he really became an empty shell, like a cold weapon, completely abandoning his emotions, thoughts, emotions, and so on. Zhang Tianling didn't want to see this scene, so he hoped that someone could help Elder Yueqing break his martial arts skills and disperse the effects of being too passionate. Even if doing so may affect Elder Yueqing's strength. This kid can arouse Elder Yueqing's emotions, which is quite useful. Zhang Tianling pondered and pondered. He originally just wanted Zhang Daoheng to serve as a buffer and let Xu Yueqing slowly accept the matter of finding a Taoist couple. Afterwards, the effect of excessive indulgence is continuously dispersed. Now it seems that Zhang Daoheng is capable of exerting the effect of dispersing excessive emotions. Forget it. Shaking his head, Zhang Tianling stopped thinking and said, "First, summon Elder Yueqing and ask how the two get along." I didn't make Zhang Tianling wait too long. Xu Yueqing arrived at the main peak and stepped into the main hall. "Senior brother, are you looking for me?" Xu Yueqing has great respect for Zhang Daoheng. After all, the two of them are from the same school, and she has received a lot of care from Zhang Daoheng. This is also the reason why Xu Yueqing is willing to seek help, even though she finds it troublesome and hinders her own cultivation. A smile flashed on Zhang Tianling's square and weathered face. "Yueqing, how are you getting along with your Taoist couple?" Upon hearing this, Xu Yueqing immediately understood the purpose of Zhang Tianling's search for her. She opened her mouth, but for a moment she couldn't say anything to defend herself. Silence fell within the main hall. Upon seeing this, Zhang Tianling's smile froze. Gradually narrowing his smile, Zhang Tianling stared at Xu Yueqing and said, "Don't tell me, you don't even know what your Taoist couple is doing now, do you?" Xu Yueqing remained silent. For a moment, Zhang Tianling was also silenced. He was a little angry for a moment and said, "You don't even care about what your Taoist priest does." Upon hearing these words, Xu Yueqing opened her mouth and said with uncertainty, "He should have been refining pills lately." "Should I?" Zhang Tianling was infuriated and laughed. "You're not even sure what your Taoist couple is doing, are you still using them?" Xu Yueqing was accused of being bloody, but couldn't defend herself. After all, what Zhang Tianling said is the truth. Xu Yueqing thought for a moment and then said, "He exchanged my token for an alchemy furnace and some medicinal herbs. I told him not to be distracted by these things, and if he doesn't have enough pills, he can exchange his achievements directly. If he finishes refining those medicinal herbs, he should give up alchemy and start practicing." The more Zhang Tianling listens, the higher his blood pressure. He took a deep breath to calm his mood. Staring at Xu Yueqing, Zhang Tianling spoke in a complex mood, "Then tell me what kind of person Zhang Daoheng is in your eyes." Upon hearing this, Xu Yueqing recalled for a moment and then said, "My talent is too poor, but my understanding is amazing. It's a pity. And the mind is uncertain, so it distracts the energy to learn alchemy, making it difficult to please." Zhang Tianling frowned as she listened. His intelligence is amazing, but it's not mentioned in the intelligence. He doesn't know how amazing it is. But upon hearing Xu Yueqing say that Zhang Daoheng's nature was uncertain and that it was difficult to find a book garden www.zhaozhuyuan.com to refine pills, Zhang Tianling couldn't help but feel unsatisfied. "Do you know what the alchemists in the sect think of him?" Xu Yueqing was taken aback and asked, "What?" Zhang Tianling spoke lightly and said, "He is a guaranteed third-level alchemist and has the potential to become a sixth-level alchemist. He only needs to improve his level." Xu Yueqing's face was filled with confusion and astonishment, as if she couldn't believe it. Is he expected to have a sixth grade? Xu Yueqing was really confused this time. Humph. Seeing Xu Yueqing's appearance, Zhang Tianling couldn't help but feel angry. If it weren't for the signs of Xu Yueqing being too obsessed with his past achievements, he would definitely have been angry. All right. Zhang Tianling didn't want to waste time with Xu Yueqing and started putting an end to this matter. "What do your own Taoist priests know that you don't care about? Are you still a Taoist priest?" After returning, get along well with Zhang Daoheng. After speaking, Zhang Tianling spoke calmly and began to rush people, "I won't send you off." Xu Yueqing forced a bitter smile. She really didn't expect that Zhang Daoheng had a talent for alchemy. Even a few fifth-grade alchemists inside the sect personally said that Zhang Daoheng is expected to reach sixth grade. But I feel that the other party is not doing their job properly. But Xu Yueqing was also quite helpless. If a normal person knew that Zhang Daoheng had only read the Book of Heaven 18 times and fully understood it, they would probably have the same idea as her, right? "I'll take leave first." Xu Yueqing spoke to Zhang Tianling, but Zhang Tianling didn't even want to lift her head. Even Zhang Tianling urged, "Let's go, let's go." Xu Yueqing once again forced a bitter smile. Chapter 8. Unyielding Wrath. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, sigh. Watching Xu Yu's figure disappear from afar, Zhang Daoheng couldn't help but sigh. Although he is from the same sect as Xu Yueqing and is still the leader of the Daoxian sect, it does not mean that his strength is superior to Xu Yueqing. Even on the contrary, due to handling sect affairs and reducing cultivation time, his strength was far surpassed by Xu Yueqing. The other party has great talent and has become a deity-transforming master in 100 years. It is only now that I am worthy of the deity-transforming status. If it weren't for Xu Yueqing's curiosity and disobedience in the past, who insisted on forcibly cultivating Tai Shang forget emotion, now the Taoist Xuanzong would probably have produced an additional returning true lord. Or even a living true immortal. At that time, Xu Yueqing was called the Yueqing fairy outside, and many people admired her. But now I have taken the wrong path. Zhang Daoheng also hopes that Xu Yueqing can break free from his excessive forgetfulness and not dwell on this breaking technique anymore. When it comes to forgetting too much, Zhang Daoheng gritted his teeth a bit. I don't know which ancestor had his brain kicked by a donkey and put the broken martial arts technique in the scripture storage hall, where his junior sister saw him. Although her martial arts were powerful, after Xu Yueqing practiced, she was able to use the realm of transforming gods to slay back into emptiness. But if it weren't for this skill, Xu Yu would have become a returning void early in the morning, so she could still slay the returning void. Zhang Daoheng looked out of the hall and said in a faint voice, I hope that the Taoist priests of Yueqing can let Yueqing break the martial arts. Forgetful Peak. Returning to the peak of forgetting emotions, Xu Yueqing was still pondering what Zhang Daoheng had said. She is planning to go over and see what Zhang Daoheng is currently doing, and by the way, ask him what he has been doing this month. Thinking about it, Xu Yueqing suddenly remembered something. I taught Zhang Daoheng a swordsmanship by myself, and it seems that the other party had already practiced it in the first few days. Later on, they didn't even touch their swords. Frowning, Xu Yueqing felt in her heart that Zhang Daoheng was truly wasting his time. Arriving outside Zhang Daoheng's yard, Xu Yueqing walked directly in. Then Xu Yueqing noticed Zhang Daoheng's aura, which had already reached the 4th level of qi cultivation. It seems that it has just broken through, and the breath is a bit unstable. According to Xu Yueqing's guess, it takes about 7 days for Zhang Daoheng to practice the 2nd layer of qi. Now, after breaking through the 4th layer of qi cultivation in a month, I should have taken a lot of pills. After some thought, Xu Yueqing didn't rush to understand what had happened this month. Instead, she asked Zhang Daoheng, how many pills did you take? Zhang Daoheng had just finished practicing a furnace of qi gathering pills, but before he could open the alchemy furnace, he saw Xu Yueqing appear and asked him how many pills he had taken. After a moment of contemplation, Zhang Daoheng replied, I have taken about 1,000 qi-absorbing pills this month. Zhang Daoheng takes about 4 to 5 pills a day, mainly to see when the remaining erysipelas in his body are cleared. Dandu is the residue of a pill, and if it accumulates in the body, it will affect cultivation. Zhang Daoheng takes the initiative to detoxify. Generally, if it's fast, it can be cleared in 3 to 4 hours, and if it's slow, it can be resolved in 4 to 5 hours. Xu Yueqing. After hearing these words, Xu Yueqing remained speechless for a moment. She was completely silenced. Your talent is not good enough with so many pills, replacing them with a medium-grade spiritual root has already trained qi for 9 layers and is ready to build a foundation. If it were me, I wouldn't need to take any pills, I would almost start building a foundation. In silence, Xu Yueqing had no choice but to shift the topic. Are you refining pills? Yes. Zhang Daoheng nodded and then took the opportunity to open the alchemy furnace. There are 12 qi-gathering pills quietly falling into the alchemy furnace, shining brightly and looking top quality. Xu Yueqing naturally saw these pills and her face showed a slight sense of astonishment. a powerful alchemist can refine about 8 to 10 pills in a furnace. As a result, Zhang Daoheng refined pills and did not waste any of his medicinal power, resulting in 12 pills. And all of them are top quality. At this moment, she remembered that Zhang Daoheng had been referred to as the 6th level of potential by alchemists in the sect. After a moment of silence, Xu Yueqing asked Zhang Daoheng, "Is this the pill you refined?" Although she saw it with her own eyes and there were no other people on the Forgotten Peak, it still made Xu Yueqing feel a bit dreamy. "Yes, these pills are all refined by disciples." Zhang Daoheng's tone couldn't help but carry a hint of complacency. After another moment of silence, Xu Yueqing spoke with difficulty, "How many times have you failed so far?" "Failed." Zhang Daoheng looked at Xu Yueqing with a puzzled expression and said, "I have never failed before." "No failure. How could this be possible? Even a few 5th-grade alchemists in the sect often fail when they are young." Xu Yueqing quietly clenched her hand in her sleeve, not knowing what to say for a moment, and her emotions were mixed in her heart. Her eyes were full of complexity, and her tone inexplicably said, "I never thought you had a talent for alchemy." Hee. I'm also lucky." Zhang Daoheng felt a bit embarrassed when he was praised by Xu Yueqing for the first time. With a sigh, Xu Yueqing looked at Zhang Daoheng and suddenly remembered the main matter. "By the way, what have you done this month?" Zhang Daoheng didn't know the purpose of Xu Yueqing's question, so he simply said it. "There's actually nothing to say, besides alchemy, it's all about cultivation. There's no need to step outside the main gate." After a brief understanding of what Zhang Daoheng did this month, Xu Yueqing nodded. "It's similar to what she thinks." Then, Xu Yueqing said, "I passed on your swordsmanship. How did you practice it?" Seeing that Xu Yueqing had no other reaction, Zhang Daoheng almost understood. It is estimated that Elder Yueqing only wants to check the post and inquire about what he has done at the book garden www.zhaozhuyuan.com, so as to avoid other elders. Zhang Daoheng's guess is correct, but the order is reversed. Xu Yueqing only came to inquire about him after being approached by the sect leader, rather than asking him to deal with those elders and sect leaders who were evading him. Since Xu Yueqing asked about his swordsmanship practice, Zhang Daoheng naturally wouldn't hide it. The swordsmanship disciple has already learned it. Upon hearing these words, Xu Yueqing couldn't help but frown. She hates people who talk big. Although she knew that Zhang Daoheng's intelligence was extraordinary and astonishing. But even if your intelligence is amazing, what can you do? Is it difficult for you to practice sword moves that involve the elemental and even the realm of transforming gods together during the qi refining period? Xu Yueqing's face turned a bit cold. But when she turned her head and remembered the opponent's amazing talent for alchemy, Xu Yueqing's face softened a bit. "You have a good talent for alchemy, I understand if you want to refine. But I hope you can find time to practice swordsmanship as much as possible in the future. That swordsmanship is enough for you to reach the realm of the primordial spirit." Xu Yueqing encouraged Zhang Daoheng a few words. Zhang Daoheng saluted, "I know." After some thought, Xu Yueqing was still worried that the opponent might have some misunderstandings when practicing this highly challenging swordsmanship. So she added, "If you have any questions, you can come find me." Zhang Daoheng felt helpless in his heart. He had already said he had learned, but the other party still didn't believe him. But there's no way, who makes Elder Yueqing the leader of the Forgotten Peak? And it's also an elder. So Zhang Daoheng could only respond, "I know." Xu Yueqing finished her instructions and saw Zhang Daoheng respond, so she nodded slightly and prepared to leave. Chapter 9. Elders who want to dig at the foot of a wall. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, Medicine Hall. Zhang Daoheng arrived at the place where he exchanged alchemy herbs. As soon as he finished exchanging herbs and was about to leave, he was entangled by an old man. "Kid, if you don't learn alchemy from me, you're wasting your time. An old man with white beard and white hair opened his mouth to Zhang Daoheng, pounding his chest and feet, and excruciating his heart. He looked at Zhang Daoheng, who wanted to quietly leave, and stopped him directly. He felt heartbroken and said, "Kid, you worship me as your teacher, and I will teach you all my skills and pass them on to you. You can definitely become a 6th grade alchemist in your lifetime." The reason why Xiao Ran said 6th grade is because he is only 5th grade now and has no idea what is above 6th grade. But he can be certain that Zhang San in front of him is definitely a rare talent for alchemy in 100 years. Zhang Daoheng was stopped and faced the elder who wanted to accept his disciple. He could only reluctantly refuse. "My disciple has poor talent, so I won't disturb Elder Xiao anymore." Poor talent. What about poor talent? Xiao Ran blew his beard and glared loudly, "Go to my Dan hall. I have enough pills in my pharmacy. As long as you want, you can use all the medicinal herbs I buy and eat all the pills." Zhang Daoheng felt very helpless upon hearing these words. He smiled wryly and said, "Elder, there's no need to persuade me anymore. I really have poor talent, and I am a low-level spiritual root. Then if you worship me as your teacher, it won't do anything, and I won't eat you." Xiao Ran stared and said. Xiao Ran couldn't bear to watch anymore. "I don't know who this kid is, so I pulled down my old face and begged the other party to worship me as a teacher, but I still refused to agree. But the disciple already has a master." Zhang Daoheng was very helpless. He was almost losing his temper when being entangled by this old man. He dare not agree to be someone else's disciple without authorization. "If I really become a disciple of other elders, as a Taoist priest of Elder Yueqing, wouldn't it be equivalent to Elder Yueqing being one head shorter than other elders?" Zhang Daoheng couldn't even imagine what Xu Yueqing would do when the time came. Upon hearing this, Xiao Ran immediately gritted his teeth. He glanced at the opponent's token, which belonged to an elder in the sect. "I have given the elder's token to the other party, which shows the elder's favor towards this disciple. Unfortunately, the privacy protection of tokens within the sect is very strict, and Xiao Ran cannot know which elder's disciple it is through the token. There are a total of 36 peaks within the sect, with each peak having at least a dozen elders and at most dozens of elders. These elders are all at the lowest level of the Golden Elixir realm. The entire Dao Xuanzong adds up to 365 elders." Xiao Ran was curious about the news, but he didn't know how to inquire about Zhang Daoheng's identity. Sigh. After sighing, Xiao Ran still hesitated and said, "Zhang San, who is your master? Tell me, and I will personally talk to him and ask you to refine pills with me." Zhang Daoheng. He really dares not take on these words. Because he was afraid that Elder Alchemist would go to Forget Love Peak and be beaten to half-death by Xu Yueqing. The title of Yueqing Elder, who claims to be the strongest warrior on the surface of Emperor Xuanzong, is not just a boast. You dare to go up the mountain and let her Taoist become your disciple. Elder Xiao, you will really be beaten very badly. Looking at Zhang San in front of him in silence and hesitant to answer, Xiao Ran glanced at him. "Forget it, since you don't want to say it, then I won't ask. A twisted melon is not sweet. Although quenching thirst, the sect is very averse to such things. Unless you are willing to be with Zhang San. Unfortunately, falling flowers are intentional, flowing water is merciless." Shaking his head, Xiao Ran shook off all the distractions in his mind and said to Zhang Daoheng, "But if you regret it in the future and want to learn alchemy, you can come to me anytime. The conditions I mentioned earlier have always been valid." Zhang Daoheng breathed a sigh of relief and bowed to Xiao Ran. "I will first thank Elder Xiao for his kindness." Zhang Daoheng's words of gratitude are sincere and sincere. Even if the other party says regret, it still holds true, and they really look up to him. Upon hearing Zhang Daoheng's somewhat conscientious words, Xiao Ran's face softened. He snorted lightly and scolded Zhang Daoheng, "If it weren't for not wanting to see you go astray, I would have given up on you long ago. After speaking, Xiao Ran snorted again. All right. I won't say more nonsense. I can only say that you should consider it more when you go back. You've all said that you have poor talent. I really don't want you to waste your talent in alchemy and go learn those reckless men in divine martial arts just to fight fiercely. Zhang Daoheng smiled bitterly and did not answer the conversation. Because that's what he thinks, and he's also a member of what Elder Xiao calls the Mongfu. Sigh. Watching Zhang Daoheng leave, Xiao Ran couldn't help but sigh. In this month, this kid has come a few times to exchange medicinal herbs, and each time they exchange, they become a pile. Dan Tang was short of medicinal herbs, so he came over to inquire about the reason. Today, he happened to meet Zhang Daoheng. At first, Xiao Ran thought the other party was here to collect wool, so the medicinal herbs in Dan Tang were reduced significantly. Because the prices of medicinal herbs in the sect are relatively low, Xiao Ran thought that the other party was preparing to buy and sell Lingshi for a small profit. It wasn't until he forced the other party to refine pills in the pharmacy just now, proving his level, that Xiao Ran was shocked to find that this kid had extremely high talent for alchemy. No matter what pill you practice, you can succeed on the first attempt. I have tried several times, but none of them have failed. And the elixirs are top quality, with each batch containing 12 pills, no more, no less. Even if Xiao Ran deliberately uses some medicinal herbs with the same appearance but different medicinal properties to the other party, they can be easily distinguished. Xiao Ran was completely shocked. After he regained his composure, he could only sigh at the book garden www.zhaozhuyuan.com, saying that he was a natural talent for alchemy. As a result, they don't even want to practice alchemy well, it's just because their cultivation speed is too slow, that's why they specifically learned alchemy. When he heard this reason, Xiao Ran almost felt nervous at the time. I just don't know whose disciple Zhang San is. Xiao Ran touched his beard, pondering how to dig the corner of the wall. Zhang Daoheng left the pharmacy, feeling a lingering fear towards the old man with a white beard. His purpose in alchemy is simply to use it for his own cultivation. Instead of wanting to become a specialized alchemist or even an alchemy machine. In my previous life, I worked 2 shifts and worked overtime. I have traveled to the world of cultivating immortals in my lifetime, and if I still want to do so, it will truly be a darkness in my life. Soul snatching and life chasing assembly line, dark and dark ghost workshop, life and death cycle in 2 shifts, overtime without salary increase. Thinking about these dark days, Zhang Daoheng couldn't help but shiver. Sigh. Thinking about it, Zhang Daoheng couldn't help but sigh. Unfortunately, the time it takes for this elixir to be completely repelled is too long, and the speed at which spiritual energy gathers is also too slow. Taking 3 to 5 pills a day is the limit, which is enough for me to practice 3 to 5 times. The spiritual energy on the forget emotion peak is a bit insufficient, I can only practice twice a day. Whispering, Zhang Daoheng couldn't help but frown. It's all because of my poor talent that leads to such results. Thinking about these, Zhang Daoheng couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. No, I need to find a way. We cannot rely solely on the spiritual energy of the forgotten peak to recover on our own, as well as on swallowing pills for cultivation. This is too inefficient. Chapter 10. Want to set up a gathering spirit formation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, because Dao Xuanzong was a behemoth that occupied 30.6 peaks, the nearby mountain ranges were connected together. The medicine hall stands on the medicine peak, which is a mountain peak dedicated to cultivating spiritual medicines, natural materials, and treasures. Stepping out of the pharmacy, Zhang Daoheng began to stroll around. Since Zhang Daoheng began alchemy, he has always left after buying medicinal herbs and has never stopped at the peak of medicine, without knowing the specific situation of the peak. As soon as he left, Zhang Daoheng saw a group of disciples holding a compass and looking around. For a moment, Zhang Daoheng was a bit curious. Is there anyone in the fantasy world who watches feng shui or something? Approaching, Zhang Daoheng found one of his disciples and curiously asked, "What are you doing?" The disciple who was spoken to frowned and didn't respond when he heard someone asking him a question next to him. "Are you blind? Can't you see we're building a formation?" Formation. Zhang Daoheng was confused and remembered that this was a fantasy world. It turns out that the other party is setting up formations, not looking at feng shui. But then, Zhang Daoheng remembered another thing. According to the novels he has read before, it is mentioned that the gathering spirit formation can gather spiritual energy. Thinking of this, Zhang Daoheng's eyes lit up quietly and he continued to ask, "Can you set up any formation like the gathering spirit formation?" The disciple who was interrupted to observe the feng shui position when he heard the people around him still talking, suddenly felt a little annoyed. "Are you?" He simply turned around, wanting to curse, and suddenly noticed that the other person was holding a token. That's the elder's order. That is to say, the other party is at least a true disciple. The disciple who arranged the formation swallowed up what was to be said later, and the atmosphere fell into silence for a moment. "What the hell am I?" Zhang Daoheng frowned when he heard the tone of the formation disciple being so impolite, feeling a bit displeased. If the other party scolds him, even if he can't fight, Zhang Daoheng is ready to give the other party some color to see. After a moment of silence, the disciple put away the compass and forced a smile, saying, I wish my senior brother and mother good health. Zhang Daoheng. The other party's words silenced Zhang Daoheng. After calming down, Zhang Daoheng could only skip the topic and continue to ask, "Can you arrange a formation like the gathering spirit formation?" That disciple also realized at this moment. Realizing that the other party was a true disciple, the disciple became quite polite and said, "Is this senior brother planning to set up a spirit gathering array?" "It's not that I'm bragging to you. It's just a gathering spirit formation, it's not a big deal for us." Zhang Daoheng's eyes lit up and he said, "Can we arrange the spirit gathering formation that covers a mountain peak?" The disciple being questioned looked bewildered. "What is it?" "A gathering spirit formation enveloping a mountain peak." "Is this special still the gathering spirit formation?" After a moment of silence, the disciple hesitated and said, "If it were to cover the spirit gathering formation for a few hundred meters, junior brothers could give it a try. If you cover a mountain peak, it requires communication with the heavenly spirit and earthly veins, and at least a third-level array mage can arrange it." The disciple spoke helplessly, "And we are just first-order array mages. Can't you guys do it?" Zhang Daoheng frowned and thought for a moment before asking, "Do you have a third-order array mage?" At this moment, the other disciples who were watching Feng Shui and Zhao's direction noticed the movement here and all gathered around to watch. Several disciples glanced at each other upon hearing the words. The disciple who had been spoken to by Zhang Daoheng before honestly said, "The third-level array masters are either personally transmitted or truly transmitted disciples. We can't hire senior brother Jinchuan." Zhang Daoheng's eyebrows furrowed deeper. Third-order array mage. He doesn't understand what this means. After thinking for a moment, Zhang Daoheng spoke to the disciple and said, "Since that's the case, let's forget about it." Before Zhang Daoheng could finish speaking, the previous disciple suddenly remembered something and said, "By the way, senior brother, you want to arrange a formation that covers the mountain peak, but because the elder wants to arrange it. If the elder wants to arrange it, senior brother can ask your master to go to the formation peak to find the formation elder to take action." The disciple spoke excitedly, "The lowest level of the formation elder is the 4th level, and the highest level is the 6th level formation master. I believe elder's intervention can perfectly meet senior brother's requirements." Zhang Daoheng was somewhat surprised, but upon careful consideration, he felt that it should be so. Unfortunately, he wanted to set up the spirit gathering formation not because of Elder Yueqing, But it's because he consumes too much in cultivation and his talent is too poor, so he wants to set up a spirit gathering array to improve efficiency. It's not the elder's fault. Zhang Daoheng shook his head and honestly said, I think the efficiency of cultivation is a bit slow, so I want to build a huge spiritual gathering array for myself. The excited disciples, upon hearing this, immediately became like a basin of cold water pouring down and calmed down. They thought they could witness with their own eyes the methods and techniques of the elder's full deployment, so that they could observe and learn from it. Now this idea is considered to be in vain. Several disciples of the formation peak looked at each other and sighed in unison. The previous disciple struggled to muster his energy and said to Zhang Daoheng, since it's senior brother who wants to arrange the formation, you can go to the formation Daofeng to ask those true senior brothers. Senior brother is also a true legend. At some cost, it is possible to invite senior brother to use the formation Dao true legend to take action. Find Xu Yuan www.zhaoxuyuan.com. Thank you very much then. Zhang Daoheng arched his hand and thanked Dao. Although the other party's attitude was not very good before, they still tried their best to clarify Zhang Daoheng's doubts. After Zhang Daoheng left, the disappointed disciples gathered their spirits and began to re-examine the feng shui direction, positioning and arranging their formations. At least they have taken on the task, so they naturally need to do it well. Zhang Daoheng arrived at the formation peak, but because he didn't know any true teachings, he had to go to the formation peak task hall to inquire. As a result, the disciples of the task hall were speechless when asked, so they threw a manual of formation instructions to Zhang Daoheng and let him read it himself. After watching for a while, Zhang Daoheng finally gained a preliminary understanding of the formation. The formation is divided into 9 levels and 3 major stages. The first stage is called the Little Heaven and Earth Formation Mage, which corresponds to the Qi refining period, foundation building period, and golden elixir period. The second stage is called the Great Heaven and Earth Formation Mage, who arranges a great formation that can communicate with heaven and earth and has unpredictable power. Corresponding to the 3 realms of Yuanshan, Huashan, and Huaishu. The third stage is called the Immortal Rank Formation Mage, which is manifested as easily changing the feng shui of heaven and earth by forming an array at will. Zhang Daoheng wants to set up a spirit gathering array that covers the Forgotten Peak. At the most, it requires the intervention of a 3rd-level array mage or a Great World-level array mage. In addition to what he just learned, Zhang Daoheng also learned that getting started with formations is extremely easy. And the arrangement of formations is not affected by cultivation. As long as you have enough intelligence and put in a lot of effort, you can arrange a 3rd-order formation during the Qi refining period. As for the 4th order, the manual only states the need to comprehend the power of heaven and earth, and it cannot be assigned without achieving a state of unity between heaven and man.